While Jimmy was sound asleep, Kim quietly picked up his notebook and began to flip through it. On the first page were the law firm names that Jimmy had come up with using their names. The second page had a rough sketch of the law firm's logo designed by Jimmy. Starting a law firm with his girlfriend Kim had always been Jimmy's dream. Even when he was forced to shut down his practice, he never forgot about this goal. However, Kim's plans were completely different from Jimmy's. After surviving a car accident and going through a series of recent upheavals, Kim began to reassess her career. Kim felt that as a lawyer, she should do something more just, so she started to focus on cases from public interest lawyers, aiming to provide free help to those who couldn't afford legal representation. However, one person's energy is limited, and Kim's actions led to her neglecting her Mesa Verde Bank clients. Although she had an assistant to handle the bank's affairs, issues still arose, prompting Paige to issue a warning to Kim. In order to better serve her major client, Mesa Verde Bank, while also having time to handle public interest cases, Kim approached Rick at SC Law Firm for a collaboration. Due to the previous car accident, Kim was unable to continue serving new clients, so she referred the oil tycoon's case to Rick. This left Rick owing Kim a favor. Furthermore, Kim brought the major client Mesa Verde Bank into the collaboration, which was a huge win for Rick. Making Kim a partner in the case was a natural decision. After reaching the agreement, Kim immediately confessed to Jimmy. Although it was a bit harsh for Jimmy, Kim had to reveal her true thoughts.
I like it. I'm good at it.
This line sounds familiar, although the meanings are similar. Walter used the past tense while Kim's is in the present, indicating Kim's current and future commitment to helping others as a public interest lawyer. Jimmy also expressed his plans. He intended to become a criminal defense lawyer once he regained his law license. Just as Kim said, it could help people. On the surface, Jimmy said nothing, but inside he was deeply disappointed because he had been preparing for them to start a law firm together. Kim's decision essentially announced the end of Jimmy's plans. Jimmy excused himself to the bathroom, but in reality, he was hiding in the kitchen to calm down. Judging by Jimmy's actions, it seemed like he was deeply hurt. After coming to terms, Jimmy encouraged Kim to go ahead and do what she wanted to do. After all, it would still be half a year before Jimmy regained his law license, and who knew what might change by then. Later, Jimmy went to HHM Law Firm to collect the $5,000 left to him in Huell from Howard. When Jimmy entered, he noticed many workstations were vacant, so he asked Howard what was going on. Howard didn't hold back and frankly admitted that the firm had faced some setbacks recently and its reputation was not what it used to be. This situation was undoubtedly linked to Chuck's death and also had something to do with Jimmy, perhaps out of guilt. Jimmy urged Howard to pull himself together. After tasting success from selling phones on the street last time, Jimmy used the $5,000 he had just received to buy a batch of phones to start his side business. Seeing Jimmy move all the goods into the nail salon, Mrs. Nguyen was not pleased. As soon as Jimmy finished his phone call, she confronted him. Mrs. Nguyen didn't want Jimmy to run his phone business in her shop, so she came up with various reasons to try and stop him. Seeing that Mrs. Nguyen was determined to go head-to-head with him, Jimmy had no choice but to resort to his usual methods to solve the problem.
That's on me. No, it's prepaid. 350 minutes.
Get-rich-quick schemes never work.
In Mrs. Nguyen's eyes, Jimmy was an opportunist, which hit Jimmy right where it hurt. From the lesson he learned from being robbed last time, Jimmy knew that to continue his business, he first had to deal with those three thugs, so he took the initiative to find them and seek their cooperation. Jimmy candidly admitted that he wanted to keep doing business there and was willing to pay each of them $100 a day as a protection fee, but the three thugs didn't listen to his nonsense at all. They didn't take Jimmy seriously, because they had enjoyed the benefits of robbing Jimmy last time. $100 a day wasn't enough to satisfy their appetite. They now wanted to rob Jimmy again.
You talk too much. All right, we got a man of action.
They chased him down quickly, cornering him in a dead-end alley. What they didn't know was that they were dealing with Slip and Jimmy, the once street-smart hustler. They were dragged to a secluded spot and given a serious lesson by Jimmy. Jimmy had called in Huell and Ira, his previous collaborators, to help.
I had friends, did ya? So what's it gonna be, fast or slow? It's gonna hurt like a bitch either way. What was that? Was it slow?
We're sorry, man, all right? We're sorry.
Yeah, you are. Very much so.
Look, we'll leave you alone, okay? We won't mess with you anymore.
Easy to say now, but what about tomorrow?
I'll swear, man, I'll swear on anything you want me to.
Cross your heart and hope to die?
Yes, man.
Jimmy's actions proved who the real king of the streets was, and he cleared the way for his phone business to continue. This is the world's most hilarious bodyguard. Whenever he sees someone threatening his boss, he doesn't hesitate and jumps right into fight. Unexpectedly, the guy he beat up turned out to be an undercover cop. Poor Huell was immediately arrested for assaulting an officer. To plead for Huell, Jimmy, who had been so tough-talking just a moment ago, instantly softened. He agreed to the police's suggestion and stopped selling phones to street criminals, but it was already too late. The cop revealed that Huell had been arrested years ago for theft, and just now Jimmy's attitude is very tough. If not for this stupid bodyguard in time to come over, the police really can't do anything to Jimmy. Huell's ill-timed intervention not only doesn't help his boss, however, he is facing 2.5 years in jail. Fortunately, Jimmy is a good boss who couldn't bear to see his subordinate go to jail because of him. So, Jimmy started thinking of ways to get Huell out. Since he could no longer practice law, Jimmy had no choice but to seek help from Kim. At this time, Kim had been working as a partner at SC law firm for several months. The company's benefits were excellent. Not only did they give her an Audi, but she also had a super luxurious private office. Jimmy had visited Kim's office before. Seeing Kim's thriving career made Jimmy feel a bit down because it meant it would be hard for Kim to quit her current job and start a law firm with him. Jimmy described to Kim the situation where his subordinate mistakenly injured a cop. Hearing that Jimmy was selling phones on the street to thugs made Kim think he was being reckless. However, Jimmy asked Kim not to mind these details and started planning a way to rescue Huell. Jimmy found out that this cop had a DUI record from a few years ago and planned to use it to set him up. But Kim vetoed this plan. Kim agreed to help Jimmy, but only on the condition that they couldn't target the cop directly, since he needed her help. Jimmy didn't argue with Kim's point of view. Soon, Kim went to negotiate with Suzanne, the DA in charge of the case. Suzanne was very surprised to hear that Kim was defending a criminal with a record who also assaulted a cop. No matter how much Kim explained, Suzanne didn't believe Kim's words. However, Kim had done her homework before approaching Suzanne. Suzanne has 5 cases of civilians assaulting police officers. Compared to the harm Huell caused the cop, the other cases were much more serious, yet their sentences were lighter than Huell's. Kim felt this was very unfair to her client, but Suzanne argued that Huell had a criminal record while the others were first-time offenders. Suzanne wondered why Kim was involved in this case and said something that made Kim feel very unhappy.
There is no negotiation here, Kim. And honestly, I don't understand why you want anything to do with this. On one side, I've got a decorated police officer doing his job. On the other, you have a professional thief who threw him to the ground. And our only witness is a disbarred lawyer who peddles drop phones to criminals.
Hearing this, Kim felt there was no point in continuing the discussion and angrily grabbed her bag and left. She planned to have Jimmy take her to find Huell to discuss the matter. Kim said that Huell going to prison was inevitable. She could only do her best to reduce his sentence, but Jimmy was not satisfied with this outcome. He decided to find another way.
You do your thing, I'll do mine.
Jimmy, come on, what does that mean?
Don't worry.
On the way back, Kim worried that Jimmy might do something outrageous, so she kept thinking of solutions to help him. After coming up with an idea, Kim drove straight to a supermarket and bought various kinds of pens. Once she had everything ready, she immediately informed Jimmy.
Jimmy, whatever you're doing, don't. Yeah, I know, but listen, I have a better way.
The next day, Kim drove Jimmy to the Albuquerque bus station. Jimmy boarded the bus heading to Huell's hometown. On the bus, his task was to write letters pleading for leniency for Huell, as if they were from Huell's family members. This was the preliminary work to get Huell released. To increase efficiency, Jimmy hired a few passengers on the bus to help with the writing. By the time he got off the bus, Jimmy had 2 full bags of letters. Next, he went to the post office in Huell's hometown to mail all these letters to the DA in Albuquerque. When Jimmy returned, they began the final preparations for the next day's battle. Jimmy gathered dozens of phones at the nail salon to handle the DA's callbacks. The next day, Kim arrived early at Suzanne's office to negotiate. bringing a few colleagues to help and raising various issues to benefit Huell. But Suzanne was not intimidated. She reminded Kim that Huell would go to jail no matter what. But at this point, Kim looks more like she's winning. Soon, Suzanne's boss, Judge Benedict, came to reprimand her. He suspected that Suzanne was prosecuting Santa Claus and showed her all the letters he had received. Suzanne suspected Kim was behind this, but they had no evidence. Kim, of course, would not admit it and took the opportunity to highlight how respected Huell was in his hometown. Kim also revealed that people from Huell's hometown were organizing to attend his trial in court. Hearing that a crowd was coming to the courthouse, Benedict got upset. He told Kim and Suzanne that he had reviewed Huell's case and found no need for such a big fuss. Benedict then instructed Kim and Suzanne to quickly resolve the case. This shifted the pressure onto Suzanne. Back in her office, Suzanne immediately gathered her team to verify the origins of the letters. After reading the content, Suzanne felt Benedict might be right. It did seem like they were prosecuting Santa Claus. One of her team members noticed a letter with a phone number, so Suzanne called to follow up. What Suzanne didn't know was that this was all orchestrated by Jimmy. Jimmy had brought in his old partners from his commercial shoots, and their teamwork was flawless after many collaborations.
How could you? To go after someone so sweet and kind with all those lies? Well, I tell you what I really think of you, but Jesus is listening, so I'll just say, shame on you!
Suzanne was left feeling utterly embarrassed. Jimmy couldn't stop praising the performance of the makeup girl. Suzanne's team even found photos of Huell doing charity work at a church online. Seeing the contact details, she immediately called the pastor. Unbeknownst to her, this website was also set up by Jimmy with the help of some college students. When the pastor's phone rang, Jimmy quickly had the sound guy mimic the ambient sounds of a church. Jimmy then fabricated some heroic deeds about Huell. By the end of his spiel, Suzanne was beginning to doubt her own position. Just as Suzanne was about to hang up, Jimmy casually asked about Huell's trial date, mentioning that the church planned to charter several buses to the courthouse. This matched with the information Kim had previously disclosed, and Suzanne was completely convinced. After the call, Jimmy set up the team to handle incoming calls while he went to Suzanne's office to wait for the outcome of Kim's negotiation. Once Kim came out, they found a quiet place to celebrate their victory. Afterwards, they reviewed their operation, seemingly enjoying the success that shortcuts brought them. After a brief moment of intimacy, Kim quickly returned to work. This meeting was about issues Mesa Verde Bank encountered during its expansion. Kevin believed the booming business at one branch was due to the bank's architectural style, so he wanted to use the same design for the new branches. However, the new branches couldn't achieve Kevin's desired effect due to space constraints, and the plans had already been submitted for approval. It was too late to make changes and restart the process. Kevin asked Kim if she could work a miracle for his idea again, but Kim said it was impossible. Hearing this, Kevin had to abandon his last-minute idea. After the meeting ended, Kim fell into deep thought. She looked at the cork of the sapphire gin bottle she'd got when she and Jimmy had first teamed up to cheat someone. This item was a testament to their wild antics. Having just tasted the sweet victory of defending Huell, Kim wanted to use similar shortcuts to benefit Mesa Verde Bank's clients. She then approached Jimmy to discuss the matter. Jimmy initially thought Kim was there to reflect on their actions and promised not to take shortcuts again. But to Jimmy's surprise, Kim proposed doing it again. In the next scene, Kim pretended to be injured, hobbling on crutches to the building safety bureau. She approached a staff member, explaining that she was missing a version of the blueprints during filing because some room dimensions had changed and she wanted to verify them. Seeing that Kim meant no harm, Shirley agreed to her request. After a brief check, they confirmed there were no issues with the previous version. Seeing Kim injured, Shirley asked with concern what had happened. Through their brief conversation, Shirley learned that Kim was a mother. After finishing the verification, Kim placed the blueprints she brought into a paper tube. Next, Jimmy, playing the role of the dad, entered with a bag. They started acting in front of the staff. Shirley's attention was entirely on their argument, and she didn't notice Jimmy placing the milk bag on the blueprints. When Kim returns to see the milk-soaked blueprints, she acts very worried, fearing that it will delay her boss's project. Shirley reassured Kim, saying there was no need to worry. The blueprints they had just verified were identical and could be used as a replacement. However, Shirley didn't know that Kim had another modified set of blueprints in her paper tube. In this way, Kim discreetly swapped the approved blueprints without anyone noticing. After a busy day, Kim finally achieved her goal. Later, They continued to celebrate their success, with Jimmy's suspension nearing its end and his recent phone sales accumulating a variety of clients. Jimmy realized they all needed legal services. After their recent successful collaborations, Jimmy felt that working with Kim in this way could be very profitable. But Kim, being rational, outright rejected this idea. She said that taking shortcuts could only be used for good deeds. Hearing this, Jimmy retorted, asking if what they had just done could be considered a good deed. Kim didn't answer because she knew their actions were unethical, yet she couldn't resist doing it. It also reflects the authenticity of the character roles. Everyone is a bundle of contradictions, and people often make instinctual choices when faced with temptation. It is precisely these momentary choices that can lead one down a path of no return. After a grueling one-year suspension, Jimmy finally had the opportunity to reclaim his position as a lawyer. However, to get his license back, Jimmy needed to pass the Bar Association's review. Prepared for all sorts of questions, Jimmy confidently answered each one during the review. Although Jimmy felt very confident in his answers, the reviewers' reactions seemed to indicate they were not satisfied with his responses. They told Jimmy to go home and wait for the results, which would be out in a few days. Skilled at reading people, Jimmy felt uncertain, so he didn't leave immediately after the review. He waited to catch the reviewers afterward and inquire about his results. Although the auditor did not answer directly, but from her expression can be seen that Jimmy did not pass the audit. Unable to accept this outcome, Jimmy rushed back inside to confront the reviewers. Even though they had already left the meeting room, Jimmy didn't give up.
Please! Mr. McGill, I can't. I did everything right.
It was a question of sincerity.
What?
Some members of the committee found you somewhat insincere. You're free to apply again next year.
He chased them down to argue his case. Hearing this news, Jimmy lost control and threw his bag against the wall in a fit of rage. At the same time, Kim is still waiting for the good news of Jimmy's reinstatement. She used nail polish on Jimmy's cup to add another again. She also secretly customized a handbag for Jimmy to prepare for this to celebrate Jimmy. Soon, Kim received the bad news from Jimmy. Immediately afterward, Jimmy went to Kim to vent his frustration about not being able to endure another year of suspension. Kim advised Jimmy to calm down, but Jimmy was too upset. Feeling that he had answered every question thoroughly and yet they still found him insincere, Jimmy recounted all the questions and his answers to Kim, seeking her analysis on why he was rejected. Listening to him, Kim noticed he hadn't mentioned Chuck at all. Chuck was a significant factor in Jimmy's suspension, and shortly after Jimmy's suspension, Chuck had committed suicide. Kim believed that Jimmy should have mentioned Chuck and expressed remorse over his death, but Jimmy disagreed. To him, Chuck was a painful scar that he didn't want to reopen. Jimmy didn't think this should be a reason for his rejection. As an observer, Kim understood the reviewer's mindset. Jimmy's insincerity was evident in his avoidance of the Chuck topic. Reasonable and independent, Kim didn't blame Jimmy but suggested he might find a way to appeal. However, Jimmy, having lost his composure, felt that Kim didn't believe in him. This led to a huge argument between them.
Make a big hairy deal about my dead brother at my reinstatement hearing? How is that sincere? Yeah, I don't think about Chuck, okay? I don't miss Chuck. Chuck was alive and now he's dead and that's that. Finito. Life goes on, so sue me.
I have been on your side since the day we met. Who comes running when you call? Who cleans up your messes? I have a job, but I drop everything for you. Every single time you confess to a felony on tape, I'm there. You have a bar hearing, I represent you. Fun like lying to the ADA to get your friend out of the shitter? Or fun like standing there with a smile plastered on my face while you play infantile mind games on my law partner?
Oh, what a mistake it was to take me up to your office in the sky. You'll never do that again.
Yeah, maybe I won't. And maybe next time you call, I won't come.
There you go. Kick him in when he's down.
Jimmy, you are always down.
Impulsiveness is a devil. Jimmy's irrationality also directly angered Kim, but fortunately Kim is a sensible and independent woman. She did not take it personally. Later that evening, when Jimmy returned home, he seemed to realize his mistake and regretted his words to Kim. He packed his bag, ready to leave. Seeing the dejected Jimmy, Kim ultimately decided to help him.
You still want to be a lawyer?
Yeah.
Well, we can start with that.
A few days later, Jimmy visited Chuck's grave to pay his respects. It was the anniversary of Chuck's death, and given Chuck's standing in the legal community, many people were expected to come to mourn. Indeed, Jimmy encountered some colleagues there. To help Jimmy successfully obtain his law license, Kim came up with the idea to have Jimmy demonstrate sincerity to the Bar Association staff. In order to build his persona, Jimmy donated a reading room in Chuck's name at great expense so that he could attract congratulations from his peers in the legal profession. The donation was announced anonymously, but Jimmy had already arranged for Makeup Girl to leak the news. This would highlight Jimmy's sincerity without revealing his ulterior motive, since part of Chuck's will was to fund students in need. Jimmy was fortunate to be on the voting committee. The selected students would introduce themselves and explain their scholarship applications. However, each person's introduction was cut short, and their full explanations were not shown. What they said didn't matter, as the scholarship recipients were already predetermined. When Howard announced the voting results, Christy, who received only one vote, was the one Jimmy voted for because of her excellent grades. Others didn't vote for Christy because she had once shoplifted from a supermarket, but that experience sparked Christy's deep interest in law, and Jimmy believed she deserved a chance. Given that Jimmy was Chuck's younger brother, Howard couldn't disregard his opinion and asked for a re-vote on Christy. The result was clear. Christy still didn't get the scholarship. As Christy was leaving, Jimmy caught up to her and gave her some advice.
They are never forgetting it. As far as they're concerned, your mistake is just, it's who you are, and it's all you are. And I'm not just talking about the scholarship here, I'm talking about everything. I mean, they'll smile at you, they'll pat you on the head, but they are never, ever letting you in. You are gonna cut corners, and you are gonna win. They're on the 35th floor, you're gonna be on the 50th floor. You're gonna be looking down on them. And the higher you rise, the more they're gonna hate you. Good. You rub their noses in it. You make them suffer. Because you don't matter all that much to them. So what? Remember, the winner takes it all.
Because Jimmy saw himself in Christy, he once made a mistake and was so helpless. Jimmy's words were also a message to himself. To get what he wanted, he needed to take shortcuts by any means necessary. When Jimmy was ready to leave the HHM law firm, his Suzuki broke down again. Jimmy was devastated. Even his car seemed to betray him at his most vulnerable moment. After regaining his composure, Jimmy returned home to find Kim had already prepared a speech for him. With all their groundwork, they couldn't afford to fail now. But Jimmy felt a lack of confidence, thinking of himself as a failure. Convinced the Bar Association wouldn't change their opinion of him, Kim encouraged him to stay positive. Jimmy suddenly remembered the letter Chuck had left him and thought to use it to impress the reviewers. Kim also came to support Jimmy in this appeal. She advised him not to worry too much about the outcome, assuring him that no matter what, she would always stand by his side. According to the plan, Jimmy took out the letter from Chuck and began to read it. However, he stopped after just a few sentences. He noticed the reviewers were indifferent and realized continuing wouldn't show his sincerity. So, Jimmy decided to speak candidly and expressed his heartfelt remembrance of Chuck in his own sincere words.
I was gonna try to move you all with my brother's eloquent words. You know, pull on your heartstrings, but it's not right. This letter's between me and him, and it should stay that way. He was the most brilliant man I ever knew, and an incredible lawyer, you know, and he knew exactly who he was, exactly. And all my life, I wanted to make him proud. Lucky few who reached that peak, even for a moment. If you made him proud, wow, what a feeling. And he let you know it too. But if you weren't one of those people, he was polite enough, but he did not suffer fools, you know? And he could be judgmental and difficult, and he knew how to get under your skin. I mean, look at me. I'll never be as moral as him. I'll never be as smart. I'll never be as respected. I'll never be as good as Chuck. But I can try. I can try. If you decide and I get to be a lawyer, I'll do everything in my power to be worthy of the name McGill.
Jimmy's speech successfully captured the attention of the reviewers, even moving Kim, who stood beside him. This time, Jimmy managed to demonstrate his sincerity effectively. Just when they were happily celebrating this victory, Jimmy's words suddenly scared Kim.
I could tell by their faces it wasn't going to be enough, right? So I just went off on this flow, I had this energy going through me. It was like improv or jazz, and then boom, I sunk the hook in.
Kim had believed that Jimmy's earlier speech was genuine, only to realize it was all an act. Jimmy even mocked the reviewers who were moved by his words, which clashed with Kim's values. Then the staff came to ask Jimmy to sign, which means he has passed the audit and can get back his lawyer's license to practice. Jimmy requested to change his name because the clients he had gathered over the past year knew him as Saul Goodman.
It's all good, man.
Thus, Saul Goodman, the lawyer specializing in defending criminals, was officially born. Although Kim felt something was off, she didn't realize that this would change the course of their destinies.